This video is going to begin the lecture series on Chapter 12, dealing with monetary policy, out of the 3rd edition Agricultural Economics book by Drummond and Goodwin. And we're going to start off talking about the supply of money. The supply of loanable funds and the demand for these loanable funds at an individual bank strongly influence the microeconomic decisions of both lenders and borrowers. One of the strongest deciding factors that determine the supply of money is an interest rate. So, interest rates is a great indicator at the macroeconomic level, or helps at our interest rates of an individual bank strongly influence the microeconomic decisions of both lenders and borrowers. So if we want to think about it in agricultural terms, if interest rates are real high, is that going to encourage or discourage borrowers, agricultural borrowers, to borrow? It's going to discourage them to borrow. If interest rates are real high, then that means that the cost of borrowing money is really, or it can be high, and therefore if they went out and bought an asset, or if they borrowed money to obtain an asset, then that could actually cost them more money if interest rates are high. So interest rates are a strong determiner of the supply of money. And that helps determine the supply of loanable funds, which in turn affects both lenders and borrowers and helps them with their microeconomic decisions. What are their individual decisions are often based off of what are these interest rates. If interest rates are real high, borrowers are not going to want to borrow as much, whereas lenders are going to want to lend out a lot more. So interest rates. The first question I want to pose is, are interest rates important to agriculture? They are highly important to agriculture. In 2007, the American agriculturalists paid $15.1 billion in interest. $15.1 billion in added costs in interest and the cost of borrowing these loans, these funds. So interest rates may determine whether to buy the new tractor that is needed. If interest rates are real high, then it may actually discourage a farmer or a rancher or an agricultural producer from buying this new piece of equipment. Why? Because if the interest rate is a cost, and it increases the cost of this equipment, and if the cost is too high, it may not be profitable for them to buy that piece of equipment. Whereas if interest rates are real low, the cost of buying that equipment has now been lowered, making it potentially more profitable, so that they will actually go out and buy the new tractor. So interest rates, they can determine whether or not to buy a piece of equipment, a piece of land, or invest in different aspects. Next, we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve System. Interest rate and the level of loan activity are jointly determined in the market of loanable funds. What is the interest rate and how many loans are going to be enacted are determined in the market of loanable funds. That was that market that we talked about back in Chapter 10, when you have a supply of loanable funds and a demand for loanable funds, or you have a demand for funds for loan and a supply of funds that help the banks make these loans. Changes in the quantity of loans made are caused by shifts in the demand or supply of money. changes of quantity of money are largely determined by the Federal Reserve System. So, we have the market for loanable funds, and that helps determine these interest rates and the level of loan activity. So these changes in the quantity of loans and the interest rates are caused by shifts in the demand or the supply of money. Now, the quantity of money, the amount of money that's in the market, that measure of M1, that is largely determined by the Federal Reserve System. Another name for the Federal Reserve System is the Fed. We often hear about the Fed in the news. Everybody talks about the Fed, the Federal Reserve. That is this Federal Reserve System. Its nickname is the Fed. So the Federal Reserve System, its definition is an independent federal agency that is made up of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks that serve as banks for commercial banks. That's a pretty important aspect to realize, is that the Federal Reserve System serves as a bank for commercial banks. What often in commercial banks, people may go in and borrow from the bank, from a commercial bank. An individual consumer may borrow from a commercial bank as well as deposit money within a commercial bank. Well, commercial banks can do the same thing with the Federal Reserve System. They can go in, commercial banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve System as well as deposit money in the Federal Reserve System. Another important aspect of the Federal Reserve System, of the Fed, is they can directly cause the supply of money to shift by monetary policy. So what is monetary policy? Monetary policy is the deliberate changes in the rate of growth of the money supply in the economy in an effort to achieve a macroeconomic objective. So, what monetary policy is they're going in and they're doing something that changes this rate of growth of the money supply. So, the Federal Reserve actually goes in there and they can enact different monetary policies to either put more money out or to increase the money supply or decrease the money supply. And they'll do this at different times in order to try to obtain some macroeconomic objective. So, what are these macroeconomic objectives that they're trying to obtain? Well, there is three main ones that the Fed is trying to control. So the monetary policy of a country has a direct effect on inflation. Remember, that is when purchasing power is increasing. The decreasing of purchasing power. That is inflation. The amount of money that you have right now cannot buy as much today as it can tomorrow. So monetary policy is enacted to try and keep inflation from increasing. It helps with unemployment and economic growth. The monetary policy is often trying to accomplish these three things: decrease inflation, decrease unemployment, and increase economic growth. So in this chapter,